Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men have asked me for the right words to say to be more attractive, desirable, and more of a leader. And I've found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines. Because at the root of a connected and affectionate relationship and being more effective and inspiring at work is your ability to influence others. But most often, influence is not gained or lost with words. It's from what I call the invisible factors. So I created a quick guide for you called 3 Ways Men Lose Influence at Work and with Women, so you can understand how these invisible factors work and what has women and colleagues both more inspired to say yes. I think you're also going to be surprised to find out the moment when your influence actually begins. So grab the guide for free at ShanaJamesCoaching.com/3ways. That's ShanaJamesCoaching.com/3 and the word ways, WAYS. Or you can text ALIVE to 44144. That's the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144. I hope you enjoy the guide and this episode.
Deep breath.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I am Shana James, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about simple experiments for better sex. And I'm here today with Alyssa Marine. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thanks, Shana.
Really happy to have this conversation because we have connected about how, a lot of the support for people having a better sex life out there is complicated. And it's, when we had a discussion before this, it was like, you got to try this position and you have to breathe in this way and you have to hold your breath in that way. And then you have to move in that way. And then hold
you
this
have to
part.
be a wild animal. And
then you have to be a cheetah. And then, so, part of what I love about what you do is that you really break it down and make it simple so that people can actually have more intimacy, more connection, and even, more passion and ultimately a better sex life because they're not trying to mimic someone else's playlist or something like that. So why don't I give you an introduction before we dive in, and then we'll take it from there. So Alyssa is a somatic sex educator, relationship and intimacy guide, and founding faculty of the Institute for Erotic Intelligence. She weaves mindfulness, embodiment, soulcraft, and practical information into her work with individuals, couples, and groups, and really breaks down the complexity of pleasure, embodiment, and relationship into understandable, actionable parts that can be worked with and made sense of. And this doesn't take away from the mystery and magic of the full erotic experience. So she's had nearly 10 years of her own exploration in sexuality, consciousness, soul-centric practices, and even Zen, which I love that you bring all of those aspects into this. And she was really drawn into this field of work because of a lack of sexual education combined with a lineage of sexual trauma and shadow. So thank you so much for being here today and for having this conversation and for everything it took for you to get to this moment, being able to teach this.
Totally. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So why don't we start with, how did you come to this perspective or this wisdom around the simplicity of sex versus the complexity, exploring the simplicity?
It's sort of a twofold answer. One is going to seem like I'm going in a completely different direction, but I coached gymnastics for 14 years, from the time I was 14 until I was 28. And what I learned how to do really efficiently and quickly, because I had to, was how to break down these complex sequences of skills and flips and all sorts of stuff into little bite-sized ways, little bite-sized changes. Because when you're working with a 10-year-old or anyone, when anyone is like flipping through the air and you're trying to help them do it better, the more simple of an adjustment you can make, the easier it's actually. What's actually true is if you give them a complex adjustment, it doesn't actually work.
Right. It's harder.
But if you
Yeah.
break it down to, hey, you need to push harder in this spot right here, then it's something they can actually do. And then it has a huge impact down the line.
So I imagine this is the one that might seem like it's not connected, but now I can totally get the connection.
It comes around pretty quick, but that was a big thing that I learned early on when I was a teenager, really. And then fast forward many years, and I'm working with individuals and couples around sex and their relationships. And the same thing applies right away. I found that it's so overwhelming and so loaded, sex and pleasure. And we have so much fear and trauma and shame and just these layers of almost calcification around our experience of sex and pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And the simpler I could make it, where people could actually feel a difference or some change or some amount of success, quote unquote, the more transformation happened.
Well, right. And God, I mean, success in the bedroom or success in our sex lives feels so important, right? Because there's so much shame that can happen. And if something doesn't go well, you know, many people I've met, and myself included, we can head down this shame spiral where it's really hard. So those small wins seem really important.
Totally. Hugely important. And part of it too is redefining what is success.
Ooh, yeah. Say more about that.
Well, we have, when it comes to sex, we have such a clear script that we're given that's very heteronormative, usually, where there's arousal, there's intercourse, there's an orgasm, and then you're done. And that's pretty much the script that we run everywhere unconsciously when it comes to sex. Even women run this. Like, it's not just that men are holding this. It's pervasive throughout all of us. People who are not heterosexual are still running this. People who identify other ways on the gender spectrum. Like, it's in water that we're swimming in. It's in the air that we breathe. This idea of how sex is supposed to happen.
Yes.
And so one of the simplest things, it's not easy. It takes actually a lot of work, but one of the simplest things that you can do to change your relationship with sex itself and with your pleasure is to get rid of that script. Just to literally just throw it out. Like, it's not, sometimes your sex might happen in that order, but, or it might follow that script exactly, but throwing it out and moving into more of a goalless exploration as your orientation towards it can have just reverberating impacts through your sex life and your life as a whole.
Right. Well, and I love that you just added that last part too, because I can feel where that carries over into the rest of life and how freeing. I know when, in my own experience, when I started to let go of orgasm is the goal, or there's somewhere I'm trying to get to, it changed everything. You know, there's just, it's like, oh, now I can actually be here with the other person I'm with and we can play and explore versus that goal orientation. And then, like, because so much gets missed in that framing, right? If we're trying to get somewhere.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, okay. Can you say the cycle again one more time of arousal, intercourse,
orgasm?
That's it.
That's the script that we're given. And it's pretty much the part that's important is that it's, we really treat it like it's a sort of a rocket ship trajectory where it's supposed to start and it's supposed to build and get more and more and more and more and more and more intense and pleasurable until we come. And that's the piece that is almost more problematic than the script itself, is that trajectory of just like, it's a straight shot uphill, moving toward orgasm, where then, if you start losing your erection, or if it doesn't feel as good for a little bit, or if it's not building, then you think something is going wrong.
Horribly wrong.
True.
Right.
Like, our pleasure actually tends to, our orgasm tends to happen sort of in cycles, where there will be excitement for a while, and then it sort of crests, like it builds and builds, and then it sort of peaks and crests down into what we call enjoyment. And then it'll build into more excitement and then down into enjoyment. And that's actually a natural rhythm of our pleasure that we can tap into and enjoy. That doesn't mean that something's going wrong. It's actually how pleasure and arousal,
how our bodies work, and how our, right.
Yeah. And not just for women. This is true for men also.
Yeah. I mean, I've found for myself too, that when I started to include those moments of, oh, somehow this isn't feeling as good, or something is just a little bit, lighter, looser, it's not as intense. For me, that's actually brought a lot of intimacy when I've been willing to risk saying, oh, hey, here we are right now, right? This is what's happening, or to bring up a desire, or so I'm curious how you work with people to free them from these phases and to help them actually get into, okay, here's what enjoyment can feel like, and you don't actually have to be on this rocket ship path.
Yep. So a couple ways to do that are, anytime you notice that happening, where it starts to feel less intense or less pleasurable or whatever, it's not building toward orgasm anymore, you can take that as an opportunity to try something different. So this is something with couples that often works really well, where it's like, okay, it was moving in a particular direction and it's not anymore. It doesn't mean it's a problem. It means try something else.
Right.
Maybe change positions, or change the speed, or change the angle, or change the, no matter what you're doing, just change something and see what happens. Because our pleasure doesn't, I think this is true more for women than for men, but it's also true for men, where sticking with one particular thing, like one way of touching or being touched, stops feeling as exciting as it did 10 seconds ago.
Right.
When you've been
even if it's the same exact thing.
Yeah. It's like,
right.
Oh, that was quote unquote working. That was feeling really good, but now it's not anymore. And some of that's just how our nerves work. Eventually they it doesn't register as interesting anymore to our nerves. And so it's not hitting our brains in the same way as it was.
Yeah.
And so that's just an invitation to change something.
Yep.
So that's one way to play with it. One way that I like to invite men to play with it is to actually do a self-pleasure session or a partner session where you are intentionally stopping or changing what you're doing when you start to get an erection and start to get aroused. So you're actually staying with a soft, can I say the word cock?
You can say whatever. You just did. I love it.
Well, you could have edited it out if it was put a bleep or something.
Yeah.
But doing a soft cock self-pleasure session or soft cock pleasure with a partner, where you're really focusing on that, which then, it hits all the points of shame and fear and performance anxiety and expectation that men have on their bodies, of like, only when I have an erection is my penis worthwhile.
Right. That's the only time I am masculine or
totally. And there's
powerful.
And there's so much pleasure that can be had with a soft cock that actually can't be had with a full-on erection.
Yes.
And so just playing with that, like self-pleasuring and touching and being like, oh, I'm starting to get an erection. I'm actually going to stop and touch other parts of my body and then come back in when my cock isn't hard anymore. So those are two sort of fun ways to play with that.
I love that, especially that last piece you were just talking about, because, having worked with men for so many years, and as I get older, I'm tending to work with men who are also getting older, and, having an erection comes less easily. And so there's more of those kind of ups and downs and peaks and valleys, and, it's pleasurable and it's not, or I have an erection and then it goes away. And, I often talk about this, right? It's not just when you have an erection that sex can be pleasurable or that you are valuable or any of that. But I don't know if I'm sure maybe very few, but hardly any men actually grow up hearing that or watching porn. There's no examples of that I've ever seen. And
No,
I haven't watched a ton of it, you know?
Yeah, no, cocks and porn are hard.
Yes.
And for a long time.
Yes.
With a lot of intensity.
Yes. Right.
So yeah, this goes against everything that we're told about men and sex and cocks and how it's supposed to happen and who they're supposed to be. And so it's radical and revolutionary.
Yeah. I mean, and as I have conversations with my clients about this, I'm also aware of that as we get older, there's an emotional connection that becomes more important, right? There's a kind of intimacy or a feeling like, are you here with me? You know, I'm here with you, that when we're younger, sometimes I think people don't have the maturity to even be aware of. And sometimes it's just like, we're just doing this for our bodies and the pleasure sake of it. So I'm curious about your experience with that, with couples too.
I think too, when we're younger, especially for men, hormones play such a role in that. Like and the stories that we culturally hold about men, where if they're aroused, they actually are game and want to go for it.
Yeah.
And that they always want it. And so they're pretty much always aroused and easily aroused. Like these are some of the stories that we hold. And so I think that plays a role in there when we're younger as well, where our bodies are just more responsive in general, and our expectations are different. But certainly in long-term relationships as well, there's such a I mean, it's different depending on the man and the partnership. Like it's complex. I don't think I can give you just a straight up answer of like, yes, that's true for everyone as they get older. It depends on attachment. It depends on trauma. It depends on people's nervous systems, so many things. But certainly as men that I've worked with and couples that I've worked with, as they become more aware of themselves, more connected to their bodies, more connected to their emotional bodies, there is a real need for a different kind of connection and safety to be happening with their partner.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, right, when men are young, they can rely on the hormones, the testosterone, to just have this particular kind of sex where you know, it's intense and it's fast and it's passionate. But I also think there's a missing out in that of all the other realms and all the other ways that pleasure and intimacy can happen.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, yes, absolutely. You have to start breaking down the script that we're given before you can start to experience the other things.
Yes. Yes. One of the things that you talk about is experiments. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that, how that works with the couples you work with.
Totally. This is across the board. What I do with all of my clients is setting up, whether when they're in my office or we're working online, or I'll send them home with experiments to try on their own. But it's basically a way to try new things, both to have a new experience, but also to learn, like to gather information about what's actually happening, what's actually true, because we tend to have a lot of ideas about what's happening for us and how we find our pleasure that are actually incorrect. And so we have to run experiments like in a lab or in school, where it's like, what's actually happening? How am I actually breathing? What am I actually doing with the muscles of my body when I'm engaging with myself or with my partner? There's so many little things that we can break down and bring attention to.
Yes.
And so, so we set up experiments, and they tend to be, I mean, when I'm working one-on-one with people or couples, we create really specific experiments for them and their situation. But then I have more broad, general ones that I've created for people just as a whole that anyone can try.
Yeah. And can you say a little bit about maybe some of the, you know, since we're on the topic of simple experiments or simplicity, right? What's one of maybe the more basic ones or the more common ones that you would give, especially for a man, since this is geared toward men?
Totally. So One is, this is about as simple as it can get, is setting a timer so this is for self-pleasure. I use the word self-pleasure instead of masturbation, because to masturbate means to harm with your hand.
Oh, that's actually the meaning of the word?
That's actually I think it's Latin. That's actually where it comes from. So when I say self-pleasure, I'm generally meaning what we do when we masturbate, but it's a little bit broader than that. So doing a self-pleasure session where you set a timer instead of just going about your usual habit or usual routine, because most of us, our self-pleasure is really habituated. We do essentially the exact same thing every time.
Yeah.
Just the same way we brush our teeth.
Cycle of, right, arousal.
Right. And we don't really think about it. And it's not like it's more of a means to an end than an enjoyable exploration. Yep. This isn't true for everybody, but it's true for a lot of people. And so setting a timer, whether it's for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, and engaging in self-pleasure that entire time, regardless of when you come. You could come in the first 5 minutes and then keep engaging in sensual embodied pleasure throughout the rest of your time. And that can be it's an experiment to see what happens in your mind with the time limit. It can help take out the goal, because you can set an intention where it's like 30 minutes. I'm gonna,
not orgasm, or
I'm gonna not orgasm, or I'm gonna have one and then see what it's like, or I'm just gonna find and follow what feels good, which might mean that I just touched the inside of my elbow for 30 minutes, or it might mean that I go through several arcs of arousal. It can be really broad, but just setting that timer and using that as the container for self-pleasure rather than orgasm as the end point.
I like that.
Can be a really interesting experiment. A lot can happen in that.
Yeah, I can see that. And again, I'm loving the simplicity, right? Just having the time-bound experiment can create all kinds of interesting things that'll show up. And I also had a shift years ago in my definition of orgasm, and that orgasm doesn't just have to be like the peak of the sensation, but could be, all the pleasure along the way is this kind of orgasmic pleasure. And so, right, interesting to play with that too, versus, I've got to get to this one moment of peak sensation, or however long that lasts.
Totally. Yeah.
Any, can you give us a simple experiment too, if a man is with a partner, something he could try really simply to create more pleasure, more connection?
Yeah. So this is, I like to call this the 4 touch variations. I notice people can get really stuck in, what do I want? I don't know what I want. How do I make this feel good? Whether they're pleasuring their partner or engaging in intercourse or pleasuring themselves, there's this sort of stuckness of like, she doesn't know what she wants, or he doesn't know what he wants, and I don't know how to figure it out. Like, she can't tell me, or he can't tell me, and I can't find it. So what the fuck do we do?
Yeah.
And so, so there's 4 really simple variations that you can play with in touch. And they're applicable to any part of the body. And they are location. So you could move from, the left arm to the right ankle, and it's going to be a dramatically different experience. Or you could move from like the right side of the clitoris to the left side of the clitoris, and it can be a completely different world.
Yeah.
Right. So you can play with the location. You can play with the direction. So going up or down can be really different, or side to side, depending on where you are in the body. All of those can be, it's just a nice variation to play with. Yeah. Speed, going faster or slower. And then pressure, harder or softer.
Awesome.
So you can have these 4 variations stored in your mind, because they're pretty short and quick and easy to remember. And then you can be with a partner and you can ask, would you, it seems like your partner's not really enjoying what's going on. And you can either say, would you like me to go faster or slower? And it gives them something to try on.
Right. Instead of what do you want?
Right.
In the realm of anything is possible, that can be really overwhelming and cause many of us to go blank.
Exactly. So then it becomes we're on the same team trying to find what actually feels good in this moment. So it gives you a shared language and an easy way to be like, will you try more pressure? Oh, no, I don't like that. Will you try a little bit less pressure?
Oh, I like the will you
try going side to side, or, so it just takes the pressure off of both people in a relationship to have to figure it out. You get to experiment the whole time to find it.
I like that. I love the experimenting and the will you try, because it's like, I don't know if this is actually going to feel better or not, but will you try it? And then let's see what happens. And then from there we can take the next step. And it's like simply one step after another.
Right.
Versus, oh, we're already supposed to know. And what I find with men a lot is there's this idea, I'm supposed to know a woman's body.
Oh my God.
And I'm
like, it's so brutal because
it's so brutal.
Are so incredibly different from one to the next and from one moment to the next.
From one moment to the next, right? Like I do not like the same thing in one moment as I like in the next moment. The temperature changes or whatever it's amazing.
Yeah. So that it's such an unfair expectation.
Yes. So my hope for you men listening is, let go of that, right? I would this feels vulnerable to say and, out loud in this format, but I would way rather have the willingness to learn in my body than I would have some man who feels like he's conquered or, learned the highest form of some kind of sexual pleasure, right? Or pleasuring.
Yeah. And certainly there's something to be said for knowing the terrain. Because there's somewhat reliable areas that are going to be more enjoyable than others, where there's more nerve endings or there's particular structures or what I won't go into it all now. So it can be helpful to know anatomy and to have some basic things to try. And there's some really great books. I'll send you a list of resources, Shana.
Great. We can put it on the podcast page.
Great. Just so that you have some basic ideas of things that can feel good and places that can feel good. And they're a starting off point.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to make a note of is oftentimes I work with, and maybe this is because of the men who I work with, but it's often like, okay, I want to learn how to pleasure her if they're heterosexual and, what feels good for her. And I just did a session today where I was helping a man explore. This was over Zoom, so it wasn't anything physical, but it was like, how can you come forward and energetically penetrate or be giving while also enjoying yourself. So I just always really like to bring back that point of, we want to make sure that you're also exploring your own pleasure and receiving all of that.
Yeah, I have a list of things here written down, and one of them is touch for your pleasure. Which is a version of what you're saying, where it's like, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing one-way touch where you're just touching your partner or you're going down on them or whatever it is, it's often the best place to start is with what feels good to you.
Right. Which is so counterintuitive, but it can...
Initially it is. But I think once you have enough experiences of that under your belt, as working in some way or other, because it brings you into a kind of presence where you're not trying to figure something out. You're actually in the sensation itself. And so you're more present, which makes you safer for one thing. It makes it more enjoyable for you, which is going to translate into whatever is happening for your partner as well.
Totally. I actually remember a workshop I was in one time where we were doing that. We were, touching for our own pleasure versus touching for what we thought would be pleasurable to the partner. And I was with a partner at the time, and oh my God, the touching for what I thought he wanted was a total disaster. And by the end of it, he was just like, this does not feel good. What are you, he was really frustrated with me. And I was just like, And then when it shifted to touching for my own pleasure, it was amazing for both of us. And I just really got it.
Beautiful. That's usually true across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have many stories with couples and in my own life that I could tell about that. Yeah. And it's actually, I'll include this. I'll send you a link to this as well. But the Masters and Johnson, who did a ton of pioneering sex research back in the 50s and the 60s. Yeah. But one of the processes that they created for men who are having erectile dysfunction, erectile challenges, was a practice called sensate focus, which is essentially what we're talking about, where they would be touching their partners for their pleasure. And that was a way that over time they were able to help most men. I don't know what their statistics were, but it's persisted to this day. This is a practice that I use with my clients for various reasons, not just for this reason. Yeah. But this is where it came from, is that it was to help men reconnect with their own pleasure so that they could find arousal again.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, this is awesome. I'm loving this conversation. And, yeah, for now, what if you were to leave this podcast session, because I could see us doing another one, and not have said something that feels really important, what would that be? What do you want to leave men with?
I feel a lot of pressure now.
Gotta be the right. Well, interesting, right? I mean, you think about it and it doesn't have to be the right thing, but that's kind of the pressure. I feel like it mirrors the pressure that men go through. Like, I'm supposed to get it right, or there's only one thing, or there's this one way. So I kind of love that just came up. Even
totally. It's so great. It's like, oh no, I don't know anymore. I think it would be that, here we go. You're never gonna completely figure it out about your own body or about a partner's body. And so what you want to focus on, instead of trying to figure the thing out and engineer and create, the spreadsheets of okay, this spot, a little to the left and this kind of pressure, that's not gonna work.
Yeah.
Right. And so the direction to go instead is to build tools and skills and resources to help you figure it out from one moment to the next.
Yeah.
So communication, it all sort of boils down to communication, but that and different ways to connect with each other through that, or to connect with yourself, and really learning how to experiment so that you can, because you never want, and this is my bias, I never want my sex life to be figured out and done.
Right.
I want to be learning and experiencing new things.
Yes.
And so bringing in curiosity and experimentation into your sex life is going to create a whole other kind of experience with it forever, potentially, and hopefully, and help you to work through any challenges that come up, because they come up all the time. New ones pop in, when people have been together and had satisfying sexual relationships for 20 years, all of a sudden it's like, wow, this isn't working anymore. If your partner has a baby and her body's completely different than it was before she gave birth, or, you have an injury, or whatever it is, it can just help you work through everything. So
thank you so much. And where can we find you? Where can people find you if they want more?
Yes, I have a website, thiseroticlife.org. And if you go to thiseroticlife.org/manalive, one word, man alive, there's some things. If you leave your email address, I'll give you some things that we talked about in here, some handouts and practices and audio things that you can try to actually do some of these things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for having that generous offering. And
it's so fun.
Yeah. Let's do this again.
Totally. I know, we just got started.
I know. Thank you. Great. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.